Good morning. It's Tuesday. Funny story, we're going to be talking about a particular Tuesday. In fact, in particular, we're going to be talking about Super Tuesday and how the setting of Trump's trial for the day before Super Tuesday goes beyond election interference. All right, and good morning, everybody. Good morning. I see Uncle Steve has first blood this morning. I've got both Dannys with me. Good morning, good morning. And my mother-in-law is with us. Good morning, Trish. Fishing, Golf, and Guns, and Georgia Constitution Media. My man, good morning. Hey, just GCM, little heads up. I ordered a couple of toys in the mail. Ought to be here today or tomorrow. A reporter microphone with a pro flag with the Brushfire Mind logo on it. You know what I'm talking about, brother. We might be having a little fun with that in the not too distant future. So, all right, this morning we're going to be talking about the trial date that's been set for Donald Trump. Donald Trump. This trial date. This is a big deal, guys. The trial of Donald Trump on charges of plotting to overturn the 2020 presidential election result has been set for the 4th of March, 2024. Let me clarify something real quick. Every presidential candidate that is currently alive and has not been the president, every single candidate who has lost an election for the presidency has filed suit to challenge the result of that election. Every Republican president who has been elected for more than 50 years has been targeted with impeachment. Now, there has been talk of impeachment for each and every president by somebody, some fringe, some less fringe. But when I mention the Republican presidents in that category, in the case of each and every one of them, during the course of their presidency, a Democrat has actually filed articles of impeachment. Now, that is not to say that all of those have come to the floor and been voted on, but they've at least begun the process with every single one of them. The same is not true on the other side of that coin. But this trial date, March 4th of next year, that goes beyond election interference. You're going to read a lot of articles. You're going to see a lot of YouTube videos coming out over the next day or three, maybe for the next couple weeks. And you will hear this refrain repeatedly, that the setting of the March 4th trial date is direct election interference. And I'm going to make the argument this morning that it's actually much worse than that. It goes far beyond direct election interference. And this is a very important thing that I want you guys to pay attention to. First, I want to talk to you a little bit about who Judge Chutkan is, right? The judge that set this trial date. We're expected to believe that this Obama appointee judge, who is the only judge to oversee January 6th cases, who has recommended sentences, larger sentences than the prosecution has asked for. Right? So forget for a moment the glaring illegitimacy of the charges against the individual January 6th defendants. Right? And I am not even going so far as to say that no one did anything wrong on January 6th. There were definitely a few things that got out of hand, but the vast majority of people who were charged on January 6th have clearly and obviously committed no crime within the reckoning of the U.S. Code of Law. And they're being charged with bizarre and, long stretches of the interpretation of the law, misdemeanor garbage. And then they're being sentenced like they committed serious violent felonies. Now, this judge, Tanya Chutkan, is an Obama appointee, huge BLM supporter, huge BLM activist, and the only judge presiding over any January 6 cases to recommend more severe sentences, right? And this is a woman who has said, I lost the quote. Okay, so I'll paraphrase, but she has said of the January 6th event that the January 6th defendants are all party to an activity that resulted in property damage, violence, and let's stipulate to those for a moment. Property damage and violence and death. We're talking about a woman who believes that the January 6th defendants killed police officers at the Capitol on January 6th. That means that we are talking about a judge whose theoretical impartial judgment includes the clearly false belief that January 6th defendants include people who committed the crime of murder. When the fact is, none of them are even charged with the crime of murder because the only person who died, the only two people who died that day were the Air Force veteran and the woman who was beaten to death by a police officer outside. There were two people, both protesters, both murdered by police officers, and in both cases, the police officers have gone free. But this Chutkan woman believes that there were murders committed by January 6th defendants. And she was randomly selected to oversee the trial on on Donald Trump being accused of what he's accused of is attempting to overthrow the election. By the book, if what Donald Trump did qualifies as an attempt to overthrow the election, then you must charge literally every presidential candidate who is still alive and has ever lost an election. Because they've all done the same thing, which includes filing legal briefs and lawsuits. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what happened in 2020, and it's important to bolster my point about how what it means for the trial date to be set for March 4th is above and beyond. It is beyond election interference. So go back and I'll remind you of the Time magazine article referencing the shadowy cabal designed to, quote, fortify the elections. And if you haven't seen it, 2,000 Mules is worth a watch. It does, sorry, Danny, that is evidence. Proving a claim is not the same as providing evidence. But that is evidence of something happening. But as much as people like to talk about things like the Dominion voting machines, I think they're a red herring. The 2,000 Mules, I think that had some to do with it. The facts are these. The Democrats employed what are technically legal methods like ballot harvesting in certain states. And then they employed actively criminal methods like changing laws without consultation or involvement of legislatures. This happened in Pennsylvania most notably, but it also happened here in Georgia. There is no doubt in any reasonable person's mind that the 2020 election was illegitimate. To say it was stolen has some connotations that get hackles up, but it was not a legitimate election. This is true because unconstitutional alterations were made. That alone vitiates the legitimacy of the activity. It means that it was not a constitutionally legitimate election. Prima facie. And there is not a legal argument against that statement. What they're doing here goes beyond that. By vitiating the constitutional legitimacy of the 2020 election, the Democrats functionally stole it. I'm not saying that they stole the legitimacy of the election. Because they stole the legitimacy of election, because they vitiated the legitimacy of that election, it is not that the 2020 election wasn't fair and free. It is that it did not occur. Understand what I'm saying here. By vitiating the constitutionality of that election, the fact is that we simply did not have an election by law. The objective, the clear objective, with the interference that's going on now, is to remove Donald Trump from the ballot. Which is to say that the constitutionally guaranteed right of a qualified candidate is being intentionally impugned with fallacious and salacious arguments and assertions for the purpose of removing him from the ballot. The result will be that the constitutional legitimacy of the 2024 election will have been similarly vitiated, meaning that no matter how many votes anybody wins, The fact is that there will not have been an election because the election will be legally illegitimate. That's what happened in 2020. They're taking a different route to do it for 2024, but the end goal is the same. Rush Limbaugh used to say that one of the greatest objectives of the Democrat is to just get rid of elections. And then, a few weeks ago, Roseanne Barr was on the Timcast IRL show, and she said there's not going to be an election in 2024. Now, she went on to talk about like martial law and all that stuff, and we've talked about this a little bit on the show before. She went on to talk about martial law, et cetera, but that's not how it's going to happen, right? A civil war. All right, Tim likes to talk about the Civil War. A civil war in this country is not going to be Republicans putting on red uniforms and Democrats in blue uniforms lining up with muskets and shooting at each other. It's not even going to be Democrats in blue coats lining up while Republicans hide behind rocks and trees and everywhere and shoot at them, right? It's going to be an information war. We're in the middle of it. We're in the middle of an information war. So why do I go so far as to say that the selection of this particular date is beyond election interference? What we're witnessing right now is so plainly and obviously a coordinated conspiracy to defraud the American people that's being executed and enacted right in front of your eyes by the very authorities whose responsibility it would be to arrest such a conspiracy if it were detected. That's the problem. Who polices the police? Who watches the watchmen? Nobody does. So now that the authority is so corrupted, they can commit, or at least they believe, and all evidence appears to support this, they believe that they can commit crimes with impunity. The placement of a trial of the president, and more importantly in this context, the current front runner for the 2024 election. And it's hands down, right? There is no one who can look at the polls right now and make a reasonable assumption that Donald Trump is on track to lose in 2024. His polling numbers are outrageous. Polling numbers that always tend to trend Democrat say that Trump can't lose in 2024. The panic is palpable. Their only option is to remove him from the equation. Frankly, given the track record and the history of the Democrat Party, I'm a little surprised that Donald Trump hasn't been assassinated yet. Although there have been attempts, there have been threats. It amazes me that some Democrat hasn't just pulled that off already. Especially given that we can see, you contrast the guy recently who made threats against President Biden, and the FBI just showed up and murdered him. Whereas there was a woman who made threats against Donald Trump and Trump Jr., and they politely arrested her. Come with us. It is the case that even up to and including threatening the life of a president, former president, or presidential candidate. If you vote correctly, if you don't have the wrong think, then you can do that too. That's also okay. It's totally cool to threaten President Trump, but not to threaten President Biden. Two standards of justice, right? But by putting this date on the day before Super Tuesday, the attempt is to remove Donald Trump even from running in the primary, to frustrate his activities, to make it difficult for him to conduct his campaign on one of the most strategically important days arguably the most strategically important day in the entire election cycle. Right. So what is Super Tuesday? Super Tuesday is when roughly a third of all the states in the United States will have their initial primary votes, primary elections, and primary caucuses. So that it's the biggest day for securing the actual nomination to be the nominee in the general election. Pitt Danny says Atlanta was more dangerous to Trump than crossing the line in North Korea. Yeah, no shit. But it's such a transparent play. This judge, this BLM activist, right? This pro-terrorism judge, this anti-white racist judge, this judge who has handed down more harsh sentences than requested for defendants in the January 6th trials who have clearly committed no crime more heinous than thought crime, has decided to take a transparent maneuver to interfere with the 2024 election. The reason this is worse than election interference is this is a signal. This is a signal from this judge and her supporters and her ilk that they now clearly understand and believe that they can commit this crime, a conspiracy to defraud the American people, a conspiracy to interfere with the election, a conspiracy to steal from the American people the democratic selection process of the President of the United States of America. They believe that they can do it with impunity, that there are no consequences, that there's no risk. It means that they have chosen to abolish elections, at least in practice. They've already decided that Donald Trump cannot win in 2024 because there will not be an election. You may get a ballot in the mail. You may go down to the polls and cast a ballot. But the vitiation of the constitutional legitimacy of that election is the same as closing the polls completely. It has the same legal meaning and it has the same practical result. I cannot wait to see the rest of the legal analysis on this. Basically, you're going to hear everybody and his brother say that putting the trial date on March 4th like this is clear and obvious election tampering. Donald Trump has already said as much on True Social. And of course, Twitter is abuzz with it as well, you know. Trending Super Tuesday. Trump's federal election case goes to court March 4th, 2024. Wow, what a coincidence. That's the day before Super Tuesday. How is this not election interference? That's Glenn Beck. Charlie Kirk, Judge Chutkan looked at the calendar and just randomly picked March 24th as trial date, the day before Super Tuesday. Total coincidence. What an absolute farce. Tom Fitton, Trump slams Biden regime and court for more election interference after Obama appointee judge sets unprecedented snap trial of Trump to begin day before Super Tuesday. Here's Trump's tweet. Deranged Jack Smith and his team of thugs who were caught going to the White House just prior to indicting the 44th president of the United States, an absolute no-no, have been working on this witch hunt for almost 3 years, but decided to bring it smack in the middle of crooked Joe Biden's political opponent's campaign against him. Election interference. Today, a biased Trump-hating judge gave me only 2-month extension, just what our corrupt government wanted. Super Tuesday, I will appeal. It's a signal that they believe that they have taken command of so much of the monopoly on violence that they can violate you with impunity, without concern for consequences. I want you to think about that. want you to think hard about that. I am becoming very concerned about what this means for January of 2025. Because when you go back and you look at the 2020 situation, right after the election, right? There were so many suspicious details, and then a bunch of lawsuits were brought. And you'll hear people say, well, this was all decided in court. That's a lie. Nothing was ever decided in court. A bunch of lawsuits were brought, and they were thrown out on bullshit procedural lines. First, they were brought, and they were told, well, the election hasn't been decided yet, right? 2 or 3 days after the election, after the day of the election, while they were still counting in places where no water pipe burst, for example. And many of those lawsuits were thrown out on the grounds that the result hasn't come in yet, so you do not yet have grounds on which to sue. And then the results came in, and the suits were refiled, and they were thrown out on, oh, well, it's too late now. The results have already come in. Like, when exactly was the 12.5-second period during which the lawsuit could be filed between standing and latches? It's bullshit. And then several of the other cases were thrown out on the grounds that even though you have evidence which appears to show that the election was fraudulent, was stolen in this one county, you do not have standing because this one county would not have been sufficient to change the outcome of the election. Right? You heard it over and over again. No evidence of widespread voter fraud. This one county wouldn't have mattered. What about several hundred counties? See, if hundreds of counties individually wouldn't have mattered, what happens when you stack those counties together? Because remember, Trump only lost by about 42,000 votes. In an election where 155 of the 133 million registered voters voted. Never before in history has every registered voter voted in a national election, or any election in this country. Australia has compulsory voting, where you get fined for not voting, and they still can't get everybody to vote. But somehow, in 2020, we managed to come up with an extra 23 million voters. 22 million voters above and beyond what exists. But the cases were thrown out by Trump appointee and Obama appointee and some, even Reagan and Bush appointee judges. And Clinton, of course, is in there. But judges from all over the spectrum with bipartisanship threw out cases on clearly specious and fallacious arguments. What I'm suggesting here is that there was a conspiracy to defraud the American people in 2020. That conspiracy included a large number of judges who were used to block the normal course of legal proceedings that follow every other election. And many of those same judges are involved even now in the forward-going conspiracy to prevent any Republican from ever winning the White House again, in the forward-going conspiracy to defraud the American people into the continuing belief that there are legitimate elections. Now, I suspect that for practical purposes, where we are right now is the election technically happens. And it is possible for Donald Trump to win in a very technical sense. But if he's removed from even one state's ballot, let's say he's removed from the ballot in Florida, or I'm sorry, in California, which he's not going to win anyway, and then he still wins the election in November of 2024, Donald Trump does. Even though I will personally be happy with that outcome, the fact of the matter will remain that the removal of a candidate from the ballot, especially under these particular circumstances, is the same as there having not been a legitimate election. But the thing I want you to focus on today is the removal, or the scheduling of Trump's trial over the J6 complaint being on the day before Super Tuesday is so transparent a maneuver of election interference and conspiracy to defraud the American people that the signal you should understand from this is that they are essentially waving their asses at you. They're saying, na 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 boo boo, there's nothing you can do about it. We have taken this country from you, and we intend to hold it through force and fraud. We intend to retain power by making a farce of the law, by vitiating your rights, by gutting the Constitution, and by murdering you with armed agents if you should dissent. And when I say armed agents, that includes BLM guys too, because we have a couple of dozen cases from the 2020 riots where BLM activists who were identified in the commission of their crimes murdered people and were not even arrested. Pitt Danny says, and he's correct, it's meant to demoralize you. He's right. So keep your head up and stay strong. I'm still going to vote. I'm going to show up and I'm going to vote. And I recommend that each and every one of you do too, because there is a possibility that I'm wrong. It is possible that I'm wrong. And I'm not going to, if that is the case, I'm not going to be made more wrong by taking ill-advised actions. You lose nothing by showing up to the polls and voting. You lose everything if I'm wrong. If you don't show up and you don't vote, we lose everything. Right? It's Pascal's bargain on God. Right? If you believe in God, you go to heaven. If you believe in God and you're right, you go to heaven. If you believe in God and you're wrong, nothing happens. If you don't believe in God and you're wrong, you go to hell. Right? If you don't believe in God and you're right, nothing happens. So you've got heaven, nothing, hell. Right? That's Pascal's wager. So if there are no more elections and you show up and vote, you lose nothing. If there are elections and you don't show up and vote, you lose everything. It does not make sense not to show up and vote. Right? It's Pascal's wager. It's logically flawless. Get your ass out there and throw that ballot. Even if you can hear the shredder running as you cast it. Y'all be safe. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow.